Okay, so you want to own a meat shop. You picture a clean glass case full of ruby red steaks, a butcher in a white apron sharpening a knife behind the counter, and a line of loyal customers who'd never dream of buying their meat from a supermarket. You imagine buying a side of beef cheap, cutting it up, and selling every piece for a fat markup. Simple, honest, old-world business. A guy, a cleaver, and a case full of protein. Here's the problem. That picture is almost completely wrong. The steak in the case isn't the profitable part of the animal. It's the reason the rest of the animal gets sold at all. Let's start with two customers walking through the same door on a Saturday afternoon. Customer A buys 2 ribeyes for a dinner party, $19.99 a pound, 2 pounds total, just under $40 rung up at the register. It's the transaction every butcher shop owner dreams about. Premium cut, top dollar price, easy sale. Customer B buys 3 pounds of ground beef for $7.99 a pound. About $24, plus a pound of stew meat for $8.99, less than $33 total. And it looks like the boring, forgettable sale of...
Watch what happens behind the counter. That ribeye primal the shop paid roughly $14 to $18 a pound for wholesale only became ribeyes because the butcher was able to sell everything else attached to it. The tougher cuts, the trim, the bone, the fat. Customer A's steak dinner only pencils out as profitable if someone else on the same day buys the chuck, the shank, and the ground beef that came off that same animal. Customer B's ground beef, meanwhile, is made almost entirely from trim, the odds and ends left over from cutting every other order in the case, meat that would otherwise be marked down or thrown away. It costs the shop almost nothing extra to produce because it's not sourced separately. It's the byproduct of every other sale in the store. Which one is actually more valuable to the business? It isn't close. One is a showcase item that only works if the rest of the animal moves. The other is what makes the rest of the animal move at all. Let's actually run those numbers side by side because this is where it gets interesting. That 2-pound ribeye order rings up at roughly $40, but the shop's cost on premium steak cuts often runs close to the wholesale primal price, and industry data puts standard cut margins in a fairly modest 25 to 40% range. Call it $10 to $16 of gross profit on that sale, before labor, packaging, and the electricity running the display case 24 hours a day. Now stack the ground beef and stew meat. Lower margin per pound at 20 to 30%, but built almost entirely from material the shop would otherwise have to write off or sell at a loss. On raw materials that already exist in-house, that $24 of ground beef sale can carry $1.50 to $3 of profit per pound, with almost no additional input cost. It's not the flashiest math on the page, but multiply that across the volume of ground beef, sausage, and stew meat a shop moves every single week, often the single highest volume category in the whole case, and it becomes clear the boring grind is quietly propping up the whole operation. This is the first thing to understand about the meat business. The steak isn't really the product. It's the loss leader that justifies buying the whole animal in the first place. Nobody opens a butcher shop to sell chuck roast and soup bones, but nobody can afford to run one selling only ribeye either. Think about it like a car dealership that can only make money on the luxury trim if it also sells the base model to enough people. The premium product needs the volume product underneath it, or the whole math falls apart. The steak isn't the business. The steak is the reason the rest of the animal has.
Enjoying this breakdown? This is a good moment to hit subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel. If the fresh case is the entry point, then whole animal utilization is where the real skill and the real margin lives. This is the layer that separates a shop that survives from one that quietly bleeds out. Every animal a butcher buys arrives as a fixed bundle. Some percentage becomes premium steaks and roasts. A much larger percentage becomes mid-tier cuts like chops and stew meat, and a meaningful chunk becomes fat, bone, and trim that has almost no standalone retail value. A shop that only wants to sell the popular 20% of the animal has to either eat the cost of the rest or find somewhere to put it, which is exactly why house-made ground beef, sausage, and stock exist. They're not menu creativity. They're the mechanism that makes buying whole animals financially possible at all. The second layer is value-added product, and this is where the margin structure flips completely in the shop's favor. Standard fresh cuts run 25 to 40% gross margin. Value-added items, house-made sausages, marinated cuts, pre-seasoned kebabs, ready-to-cook meal kits run 40 to 60%, sometimes higher. A bratwurst that sells for $8.50 a pound can carry $3.40 to $4.25 of gross profit, nearly double what the same weight of plain ground pork would generate. The ingredients cost barely more than the raw meat, some salt, casing, and spice, but the labor of grinding binding, stuffing, and seasoning turns a commodity product into something a customer will pay a real premium for, precisely because it can't be replicated by a grocery store's.
The third layer is the one almost no customer ever thinks about: dry aging. A rib primal going into the aging room weighs somewhere around 18 to 22 pounds and costs roughly $14 to $18 a pound at wholesale. Call it $250 to $400 of raw meat, sitting in a temperature and humidity-controlled room for 3 to 6 weeks, sometimes longer for premium 60 or 90-day programs. During that time, the primal loses 15 to 25% of its weight to moisture evaporation in trim, meaning the shop is effectively paying full price for meat it will later throw a fifth of away. And yet, dry-aged steaks routinely sell for 30 to 100% more than fresh cuts, with some premium dry-aged ribeye generating $12 to $18 of gross profit per pound, compared to $2.50 to $4 for the fresh equivalent. It's one of the most capital-intensive products in the case, and done right, one of the highest margin, a bet that only pays off if the shop has the cash flow to let expensive inventory sit untouched, generating zero revenue for over a month at a time. The fourth layer is the emotional and impulse mechanics of the counter itself, and it's more deliberate than it looks. A butcher shop case is arranged the way a jewelry counter is arranged, the premium cuts front and center under the best lighting, the everyday cuts pushed to the sides. A customer who came in for ground beef walks past dry-aged tomahawks and marinated skewers on the way to the register, and impulse add-ons, a bag of seasoning, a jar of house-made sauce, a pre-marinated tri-tip they hadn't planned on buying, routinely push average ticket size up well beyond the original shopping list. Unlike a grocery store's self-service meat wall, a full-service counter puts a live person between the customer and the purchase decision, and that live recommendation converts browsers into buyers of the higher margin items sitting 3 inches to the left of what they originally asked.
Layer is the recurring relationship, the wholesale and subscription side of the business that most customers never see. Independent butcher shops increasingly supply local restaurants, caterers, and meal kit subscribers on standing weekly orders. It's lower margin per pound than a walk-in retail sale, but it's predictable, it moves volume fast enough to prevent spoilage, and it turns a shop that would otherwise be fully dependent on unpredictable daily foot traffic into one with a baseline of guaranteed revenue every single week, the same way a gym's membership base props up the unpredictable walk-in class fees. But running this is far more expensive than most people assume, and this is where the meat business starts to look less like a simple retail counter and more like a live, decaying inventory operation running against the clock every single day. A shelf of canned goods doesn't need constant refrigeration, doesn't spoil overnight, and doesn't lose value the longer it sits unsold. A case full of fresh meat needs all of that every single day, whether it sells or not. First, there's refrigeration itself, which industry estimates put at 60 to 70% of a shop's total utility bill, running continuously regardless of sales volume. A walk-in cooler doesn't get to take a slow day off. Second, there's skilled labor. A trained butcher is a genuinely scarce, expensive hire, with labor typically consuming 30 to 40% of revenue in manual shops, compared to roughly 25% in the largest automated processing operations. Third, there's regulatory compliance. USDA inspection requirements, HACCP food safety certification, and health department oversight that can run $10,000 to $50,000 a year depending on scale. None of it optional. Fourth, there's packaging and case supplies, running 2 to 5% of revenue, but adding up fast across thousands of individually wrapped cuts a week. And finally, there's the cost nobody likes saying out loud: spoilage and shrinkage, typically running 3 to 6% of total inventory, which, on a shop doing meaningful weekly volume, is real, recurring, unavoidable money simply thrown away.